Welcome to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Today we'll be talking about the death of Chris Jenkins. Here's a brief summary.
Chris Jenkins was a 21-year-old student who went to the University of Minnesota. Everyone loved him. He was finishing his business degree at the Carlson School of Management. He was the captain of the lacrosse team.
Family and friends described him as a fun person to be around. He always had a positive attitude. His parents are Steve and Jan Jenkins. He also has a sister named Sara. At the time, Chris Jenkins had a girlfriend named Ashley.
On Halloween night in 2002, her girlfriend Ashley and friends decided to go celebrate. They decided to go to a cake party. Later that evening, his friends Ashley and him decided to go to the Lone Tree Bar. A little after midnight, Chris got kicked out of the bar.
Mike Casey, the officer, kicked him out because earlier Chris spilled a drink on his pants. Unfortunately, this resulted in the off-duty officer thinking that he was severely intoxicated. Ashley knew this police officer because she worked at the bar.
Ashley borrowed Mike's shirt for her costume. It is told after Chris got kicked out, Mike was flirting with Ashley all night. He drove her home. It was freezing cold that night. Chris did not have his wallet, ID, or phone. It is theorized that Chris walked.
November 1st, Chris was missing. His family reported him missing to the police. The police said that they couldn't do anything and had nothing to worry about. His family was frustrated, so they had their own search party.
Since the family was having difficulties with the police, they decided to hire a private investigator, Chuck Leash. Chuck got surveillance video footage facing the Hennepin Avenue Bridge, which was the fastest way to get back to his house. There was no footage of Chris on that bridge.
When Chuck went to the Lone Tree Bar, they stated that he was never kicked out and issued a gag order, which means no one could speak to the police or anyone about this unless an attorney was present. Chuck questioned the witnesses.
Witnesses did say that they saw a large group of people attacking someone at a pub nearby. The Jenkins hired canines to try to find Chris. Canines sniffed out his scent from the bar to the pub to a parking garage near which had blood and feathers. This could possibly be from Chris's costume.
Police disregarded all this information before even testing it. Police did not question Mike Casey because they did not want to separate a family.
February 27, 2003, Chris's body was found near the Avenue Bridge. He was still fully clothed. The coroner noted no signs of foul play, but ruled it as undetermined. Here are some questions regarding the death of Chris Jenkins. Why did none of Chris's friends stay with him after he got kicked out of the bar? The reason why they might have not stayed with him is because they decided that they wanted to continue having fun at the bar, that they didn't want to leave just yet. They just decided that Chris would be okay walking home by himself with no ID or wallet, and they just assumed that he would get home safely and maybe he would give them a call somehow to let them know that he was safe when he got home.
Yeah, it is kind of a little messed up that his friends decided to just continue staying at the bar while Chris walked home with no ID or wallet. I would have totally walked out with my friend. I wouldn't leave my friend out there like that. But Chris was also tall. He is a lacrosse player, so they probably thought that he could fend for himself and that he'd be fine walking at home because considering his height and he's a male, they probably didn't think that anybody could take advantage of Chris. When the private investigator Chuck was hired, he questioned strangers. Multiple stated that they saw a guy getting beat up by 10 people at a nearby pub. Could this have been Chris? Yes, this could have been Chris because the family did hire out canines and they did sniff Chris's scent by this pub. There was a parking garage nearby as well that they did find blood, but because the police threw this evidence out, we will never know if that was Chris's blood or not. But it also had feathers, and Chris's costume did have feathers. So this could have been totally Chris. Unfortunately, nobody really gave a good description of who this person looked like. I feel like if they gave a better description, we would be able to tell if this was Chris or not. But I do believe that there is a decent chance that Chris could have been beaten up at this pub nearby. He could have gotten in some sort of fight, and that could explain him dying. But then it is really weird whenever they did the autopsy that there's no noticeable bruises on his body, but you can never rule anything out.
Yeah, Chris could have very easily went to this other pub after he got kicked out, decided he wanted to keep having fun, have more drinks. He could have said something to the wrong person or got an attitude and started a fight. And this also could have been how he ended up having GHB in his system. He could have went to this other bar and somebody could have slipped it into his drink. With GHB being in your system, it can cause you to do irrational things. So he could have just completely started acting abnormal, started a fight. Anything could have happened from there. Could have been Chris.
I do like how you mentioned that there was GHB found in his system, and that kind of sense does seem like there's much more involved in his murder, and this does seem like possibly one of the ways he could have died.
The coroner found hair on his body that didn't match him. Whose hair does this belong to? Sadly, whose hair this belongs to, it could have belonged to his killer that he possibly could have ripped out, and during the struggle against his killer, it could have been hair from possibly a wig or something. Hair definitely did not match to him, and unfortunately, they could not get further evidence as to who it did belong to.
Yeah, I think if we were able to find out who the hair belonged to on his body, that this would definitely open up more insight on who was involved in his death. It could have, like you said, belonged to his killer. Very likely, he probably did struggle and was ripping their hair out, had multiple people on him. I think there's probably more than one person that was on him because he is a bigger guy. It could be from multiple people, and that could be kind of why it might be hard to figure out whose hair this is. But this is definitely key evidence in finding who Chris's killer is. Could Chris Jenkins have jumped off the Avenue Bridge? If so, why? Again, you can't rule out anything, but they did end up reopening the case after ruling it as undetermined. They now are ruling it as homicide, so it is very unlikely that Chris actually jumped off of the bridge. Someone could have pushed him off the bridge, but the way he was also found in the water was very odd. The coroner noted that his arms were crossed, and usually when people die from drowning, their arms are to the side, and that wasn't the case. So likely Chris had already died before he was found in the bridge. He could have also slipped off of it and gotten in a fight beforehand. I don't think that he put himself into that water. I think somebody put him there.
Another thing I wanted to point out is, and this was actually pointed out in a Reddit post that I read, during this time, the river was actually the winter weather, season or months where the river was actually frozen. If Chris had accidentally fallen in or jumped in, his body could have been frozen for 4 months, and as the season went on and everything, with it getting warmer, his body could have finally melted. And that might be why he wasn't in rigor mortis like he should have been, especially if he had died 4 months ago. Also, another thing to point out is that when you die and all that stuff, sometimes you can have a Lazarus reflex, which is where it's like a reflex movement and where you're in brain dead or brainstem failure patients basically, which can cause them to raise their arms and then drop them crossed on their chest. It's possible he could have jumped in, fallen in, but Considering the other circumstances around his death, it's kind of more pointing towards the fact that his body could have been dumped.
Could have accidentally fallen in there because he wasn't really known to be suicidal or anything, but accidents can happen, and when you're really drunk, it is really easy to fall. You could be on the edge of the bridge and fall straight in, and like you said, his body could have been frozen for months.
Did the police officer kick Chris out because he wanted Ashley to himself? This could have been a reason why he might have kicked Chris out. Another reason could have been the fact that Chris spilled his drink on himself, and that could have tipped the officer off to make him believe that he was intoxicated, which could have gave him more like fuel to the fire to kick him out, to maybe possibly get closer to Ashley. We don't know the reason why he was actually kicked out. It could have went one of two ways, whether it was because he wanted Ashley to himself or because the officer thought that Chris was intoxicated.
Yeah, I do also want to mention that Ashley introduced Chris to this police officer. Right whenever they were introduced, that's when he saw the stain from the drink on his pants and kicked Chris out. After Chris was kicked out, she went home with this police officer. She was borrowing this police officer shirt because she wanted to be a sexy police officer for Halloween. And what's crazy too is he was even like married and he was still like flirting with her and everything. So I do think that is one of the reasons why Chris was kicked out. If you do see someone that looks really intoxicated, even if you're not on duty, likely most of them will end up kicking someone out because they don't want this person to be disturbing or whatever. We don't have any like footage of like Chris at this bar and like how he was acting or anything. It's just all based off of people's different words. It could have been multiple different reasons. It was obvious that the police officer really was involved with Ashley. Could Mike, the officer, be possibly involved in his death or even one of the bouncers? You can never rule anything out completely. What is super weird about this is whenever the family got these canines to sniff out to find Chris's body, they could sniff Chris from that bar to that pub nearby and even in the parking garage, but beyond that, there was no like obvious trail to the bridge that the dogs could sniff out to find his body. It is possible that one of the two of them could be involved. The other officers were very like protective, and they didn't really want to investigate Mike or even any of the bouncers at all. They just pretty much ruled out most of the evidence, which is a little bit shady. But at the same time, I can kind of understand because the officer may not even be involved at all, because if Chris was involved in that fight at that pub with those 10 different people, then obviously the officer wouldn't be involved in that instance. There is a lot of theories on how he could be involved. The officer and Ashley had a thing, and Ashley even went home with this officer even after not knowing a lot about him. It is very possible that he was involved in his death because he wanted Ashley to himself.
Was his death the result of murder? Gathering all the evidence and what we've seen so far of the GHB being in his system, the fact that he was missing for 4 months before his body turned up, the fact that he got kicked out of the bar, and that his scent was tracked to another bar and then to a parking garage where they found blood and feathers. This more so points towards murder than an accident, just because if it was accidental, you don't typically find GHB in your system due to GHB being a date rape drug. GHB incapacitates whoever drinks it. So the fact that they found that in his system just points out to me that somebody deliberately put it in his drink to incapacitate him, which kind of points to me that somebody had the intent to kidnap him or do something to him, whether it was murder or not. Somebody had the intent to incapacitate him, make Chris disappear. And the fact that he was gone for 4 months and his body turns up in a river more so points to murder than an accident.
Yeah, I definitely highly believe that this is murder. I do want to also mention that Chuck also contacted the Federal Reserve Bank, had surveillance video of that bridge where Chris's body was later found, and there's no footage of Chris walking to the bridge. So that makes me think that someone killed him and brought him over there. Like you said, with all the evidence in it, like for example, with the officer being heavily involved with his girlfriend, and the fact that witnesses nearby saw a fight with a guy getting beat up by 10 different people. Chris's scent was actually sniffed out by canines, and canines are very, very accurate. They're able to sniff out drugs, sniff out bodies. Those canines were able to sniff out his body at that pub nearby, which is where that fight broke out. And the fact that the canines also sniffed his scent where there was blood and feathers would be from his costume is even more crazy. It's very likely murder. And then also the fact that they decided to reopen the case back up, and when they reopened the case, they turned it in from being an undetermined cause to now homicide. Also the fact that, his girlfriend is not really giving a crap and his friends aren't really giving a crap about him. He had his life going for him. His family said he had shown no signs of suicide or anything. And the way his body was found as well, that it just appeared months later, makes me think that somebody probably murdered him and put his body there later on. Could his girlfriend be involved in his death? You can never rule out anybody as a suspect. She could be involved. The fact that her own boyfriend got kicked out without a phone, ID, and a wallet by an officer that was flirting with her. She basically didn't give a crap about him, let him walk home by himself. She could have been involved because she did not give a damn about her boyfriend. People would least likely suspect her because they'd be like, oh, well, women can't kill people. But I do think she wouldn't have been the only one. I do think that there would have had to be other people involved because, again, Chris is very athletic, he's strong, so it'd probably take a few different people to kill him. She could have been involved. Even if she wasn't involved in the killing, she could have set him up.
Did the smiley face killer murder Chris? The smiley face killings happened to many college men in the Midwest after a late night of drinking. Their bodies were found in water with the smiley face painted nearby. I feel like personally I don't really believe too much into the theory that this might have been a killing from the smiley face killer. I feel like this was more kind of a personal killing. I've done a little bit of digging into it. I've read into the theory and everything, and somebody actually pointed out on a Reddit post that the main guy that was throwing out the theory of this being part of the smiley face killings, he himself went and drew the happy face at one of the scenes, and then another cop actually showed the original crime scene photos and found that it wasn't there at the time when the police found the body. Although this is similar to what has happened to all of the other murders and the smiley face killings, like I said, I think this is more personal. The events leading up to his death and the fact that they found GHB in his system. Like I said, I feel like this is more of a personal killing than part of just a series of killings from the smiley face killer.
Yeah, I don't feel like this is a random killing. Someone mentioned on a Reddit post that most of these guys that are found without their shoes on, which causes them to sink. His shoes were still on, which also, to me, makes it definitely seem like it was definitely more of a murder, but definitely a direct murder. Also, we didn't see any like smiley face graffiti at all. It could have still been this, but I really don't think it is. I think likely someone did that because they want to cover up their tracks. But it is pretty obvious with the canines. They're so freaking accurate. They sniffed his scent in that parking garage with the blood and the feathers, and they sniffed his scent at the pub where a fight broke out. Definitely makes those theories seem more plausible because there's a lot more evidence going towards that. Any like type of sniffing dog is very accurate and you really cannot beat that. The fact that he had a date rape drug in his system and he got kicked out of a bar and all that makes me think that it had to be somebody either at that bar or at the pub nearby. I definitely think with this case, it's definitely someone who actually knew Chris. I do not think that this is a random killing, that they really wanted to kill Chris. It's sad because, unfortunately, his friends were crappy friends. They could have helped him. I just don't understand why his friends, just knowing he had no ID, no cell phone, no wallet, just let him walk home at night when it's freezing cold, 20 degrees. All he has is a costume on. And I know that he's a guy and most of the times guys can walk alone at night and be okay, but he was also drunk. If he was like that drunk, they should have at least gotten him an Uber.
I would agree with that as well. I would never let a friend, even if they got kicked out of the bar, walk home by themselves.
Yeah, that was just terrible on their part.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember, always keep your eyes open. You never know when someone's